The morning the tutorials hit, invisibility felt like a party trick. A shaky clip showed a hand, a cup, a person at the table gone. Within hours, remixers had made filters and songs about vanishing. By week 2, the novelty had already become a pocket option, a small switch between being seen and being not seen, sold alongside bus passes and grocery apps. Mira ran a repair shop on a narrow street and watched change arrive like weather. Deliveries learned silence. Packages appeared with no knock, footprints betrayed nothing, and couriers began to tie jangling bracelets to ankles. People built rituals, tap twice before entering, wear tethered badges, install pressure rugs that flashed when someone stepped. The city's etiquette rewrote itself in code. Invisible at home is fine, invisible in court is not. Laws followed, slow and loud. Parliaments banned concealment in hospitals and courts. Transit authorities declared visibility hours. Companies fitted presence plates in meeting rooms. Insurers insisted on visible witnesses. And black markets sold anti-detection creams and glow tags under subway lights. New trades spun into being. Revealers coaxed the unseen into daylight for sensitive moments. Choreographers of presence taught executives how to lead with faces. At first, invisibility was shelter. People who had been bullied, surveilled, or endangered by sight found refuge. Protest tactics changed. Demonstrations that could not be filmed forced authorities to adapt. Whistleblowers filmed abuses and vanished, sending footage like talismans. Intimacy shifted. Without performance, some relationships deepened into quiet truth. Others, propped by audience, quietly unraveled. But freedom with edges cuts both ways. Petty theft rose, kitchens felt less safe, and assaults became harder to prove when perpetrators left no face. Accidents in invisible households left no clear liable party. Inequality grew. Expensive concealment patches and boutique creams let the wealthy vanish with impunity, while the poor improvised and paid in risk. Surveillance adapted. Thermal sensors and proof engines recorded traces, and states tried to mandate registration of concealment devices, which birthed new underground economies. Workplaces became experiments in trust. Some firms required visible weeks. Others billed by presence minutes and allowed asynchronous invisibility. Schools instituted visible hours for safety and learning. Children played games that taught consent. Hide, if you like, but return when called. Museums offered phantom viewings for members. Bars advertised visible nights. Art shifted toward touch and sound. Performances composed for bodies that flicker, and music scored to tactile presence. Society's moral grammar changed slowly. People developed a soft ethic of announcement. Tap twice before you cross a threshold. Leave a token when passing through someone's home. Disable concealment in places where sight matters. Technology followed consent. Bracelets that glowed when everyone present agreed. Pressure mats that only armed a vanish when no child was nearby. The tipping point was not politics, but a child's cry. A playground game went wrong. An invisible child vanished from sight, and the ensuing search groped at empty air until a neighbor's rug, snagged underfoot, led rescuers to the child. The city, shocked, held raw debates about whether the right to disappear outweighed communal safety. A referendum passed narrow but decisive standards, mandatory visibility windows in schools and hospitals, strict penalties for concealment during sensitive public duties, and funded programs for safe concealment access to vulnerable communities. Afterwards, a compromise settled like gravel. Invisibility remained, but it lived with obligations. Rituals and tech codified consent. Social norms insisted on reappearing when asked. Law drew lines around public care. Invisible spaces persisted as refuge, rooms where victims found shelter, retreats for grief. But the old fantasy of untraceable freedom was tempered by an ethic of return. Mira tied a bright ribbon to her shop door. It was small, but people noticed. Some entered visible by choice. Some left their bracelets jangling as courtesy. She fixed watches and sewed seams, listened to stories of vanishing and of reappearing. When someone asked whether the city had become kinder or crueler, she only shrugged and said, "We learned how to choose. That's new enough."